Adventure in Pipeman on W4CY Radio.
This is the Pipeman here on the Adventures of Pipeman, W4CY Radio, and this is the Positively Pipeman segment of the Adventures of Pipeman with our Next Step CFO, Michael Barbarita, who is going to give us some powerful business strategies. So welcome to the show, Michael, and let's talk about lines of credit.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for having me. So yeah, line of credit. Now, when I get a new client, one of the first questions, early on that I ask is whether or not they have a line of credit. And about, I would say, at least 60% of the time, they do not. And that is a huge, huge mistake because as everybody knows, business has its ups and downs. And, poo-poo happens, as you probably already know.
Yeah.
And part of that poo-poo is poor cash flow due to whether it's economic conditions, whether it's just a seasonality thing, whether it's a bad sales week, whatever it may be. There's a million ways to have a cash flow dip, and most of them can be temporary if you manage your cash flow properly. And so, but be that as it may, you must have access to a line of credit. We're not asking you to go out and get a loan. We're asking you to get a line of credit that doesn't have to be used if not needed, and you only pay about $150 a year to the banks that charge it. I know of a couple banks that don't charge anything for their line of credit, so that it's free to use, and that's the end of it. With one fee up front, like $400 up front, and that's the end of it. So, but a line of credit is something that is just incredibly valuable. And here's a rule of thumb of how much, because lots of times business owners ask, well, how much should I get for a line of credit? At a minimum, 10% of your annual sales. At an absolute minimum, I like to try to go for 15%. It depends upon your credit and your situation, but even if somebody should get, let's say a $2 million business should have a $200,000 line of credit, and they can't get it, but they can get a $50,000 line of credit. I make sure they get at least a $50,000 line of credit because you've got to have it. It's very important, and you're not paying an inordinate amount of money for it. You're not paying interest on it until you use it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is there's a proper way to use a line of credit, and there's an improper way. Number one, it's not an equipment loan. Sometimes business owners go out and buy equipment with their line of credit, and then the bank, who has what's called a zero balance provision in most line of credit agreements. And a zero balance provision means that you've got to zero out your line in a period of 12 months. You got to zero out your line of credit for 30 days. So if you're going to buy equipment with your line of credit, you're not going to zero out your line of credit, and that's going to cause problems. Now, for the most part, as long as you're making your interest payments, banks leave you alone. They let things carry forward, but just wait till there's an economic crisis and the bank is starting to get pressure from the Fed to start exercising their rights under these agreements, like the zero balance provision, and start calling in loans as a result of it. That's what happens. So you got to use your line of credit for cash flow dips, essentially, and seasonality situations. Other than that, you really shouldn't use your line of credit to buy equipment or to fund operating losses. That's another mistake. Now, if you think your operating loss is temporary, that's different. But if you think that then you might go through a couple of years, funding an operating loss to a line of credit, I know it's there. I know you'll probably do it, but it's not a good idea. Not a good idea.
It's like living off of credit cards.
That's right. Stop making profit. And there are a variety of ways. We've taught you a lot of strategies in the course of this show on how to go about increasing sales, increasing business, having better pricing strategies, upsells, downsells, cross sells. We've talked about strategic partnerships. We've talked a number of ways to increase sales. That's what you should be doing instead of funding your operating losses with a line of credit.
So I have a question too that probably a lot of listeners are thinking of. Okay, so how hard is it to get this line of credit? Because I would think that it's much harder to get a business loan than a personal loan. And I would think that a line of credit would be very hard to get because they know that you could make the mistakes that you were just talking about. And that puts you as more of a risk. And because it's a line of credit, like if you buy equipment, they don't have a lien on your equipment because it's a line of credit. So what's your advice and information about, how solid a citizen you have to be to get a line of credit for your business?
So if I went to 3 banks, okay, there'd be one bank that you'd have to be an outstanding citizen. Okay, you have to have a lot of profit. You have to show a lot of profit. They're going to put you through the ringer. There'll be another bank that has moderate requirements. And then there's a bank that has ice cream requirements. For example, let me give you an example of a bank in this local area that has ice cream requirements. You have to make at least $1 or more in your last tax return. Your sales have to be over like $100,000. And you could qualify for as much as $75,000 line of credit. That's the end of the underwriting.
Wow.
So you have that. Okay. You have that. And by the way, these are complacent banks who need loans. Let's call a spade a spade. This is what happens. Okay.
Yeah.
When times are tough, those terms are gone.
Yeah.
All right. Then you have those banks that, have moderate requiments.
Well, let's go back to the ice cream for a second.
Yeah. I like the ice cream.
Yeah. So what? I just go bring them some ice cream and they'll give me the loan. But how do you know which banks are the ice cream banks?
You're gonna call. You're gonna make calls because they change. Because it's all about how much business they need, how much if they need to loan money. That's all it's about. The more opportunities, the more credit lines that they give out, the more opportunities they have to loan money, the more risk they have. And so when times are not as tough, banks get aggressive, just like businesses get aggressive potentially with advertising or, going for it kind of thing with, with their business and taking on extra risk. Banks do the same thing, and different banks at different times do that. And what's very interesting about it is that there's certain banks in this area that I would never do business with because if you ever go into default, they send the Gestapo after you.
Yeah.
And there's other banks that don't do much at all, Dean. So you've got to you should talk to a fractional CFO because they know what banks are the ice cream banks in your market. So you should really talk to a fractional CFO about it because that's one of the things that we know. Now, I know about the New England area, and I have contacts around the country as well. So if somebody called me and they were living in Topeka, Kansas, I could probably help them and point them in the right direction in terms of what banks to go after and what banks to not go after, not pursue.
So now that we're going to go talk about the mediocre and the hard, I would assume that it's a good assumption that the big banks, the like nationwide big banks, are not going to be the ice cream banks.
Before
or am I wrong?
Before 2008, you were wrong. Since 2008, the Bank of America they used to give lines of credit out for just forget about tax returns, forget about business profit. They used to give it based on over 575 credit score. You got 100 grand. They got murdered. They got so murdered during the 08 crisis. They didn't even pursue any of the personal guarantees. They just wrote off all of it and said, forget it.
Wow.
Yeah. and I had 2 or 3 new clients that came to me because they were in trouble with the bank. Well, they weren't in trouble with as it turned out, but that they had gone in default with the Bank of America during the crisis. And Bank of America just said, we wrote it off. Don't worry about it. We wrote it off. So, but since then, those banks have tightened up, to your point, and more of the, I'm not going to say local banks, but banks that are intermediate in size, say $1 billion to $3 billion in assets. Those banks, some of those banks have real easy requirements to get a line of credit. So you have to shop around, and then you have to talk to somebody who kind of knows the banks.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to go. There might be an ice cream bank, but they come after you with full force if you go into default. So you might want to stay away from that. But
so they're the ice cream truck that gives you the ice cream, and then as you're walking across the street, they run you over.
There you go.
Because you didn't pay for your ice cream.
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. You didn't pay for it. So now we're going to run you over. And that's basically what happens. So I think the banking world, you have to be careful, but by all means, you need to have a line of credit for protection. It's just, all it is defense. It's not offense, it's defense. And, one of the first things I did when I started my business in 2007 was get a line of credit. And I started with like a $10,000 line of credit, real small. And then, built it up as my business grew. But, it's a definite requirement.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize too, I'm glad you said what you did before about what you shouldn't do. It's not a bank account. Like lots of the people think a line of credit is a bank account. Like, no, it just sits there, pretend like you don't have it unless it's an emergency, kind of like your retirement plan in personal life. Can you have access to your retirement plan? You sure can. But you're going to count that money as gone unless something devastating happens and you absolutely need to access it.
The best time to use the line of credit is when your cash and receivables added together cover your payables and whatever you take out of the line of credit, because that will that liquidity eventually the receivables will eventually become liquid and you can pay down the line of credit. So it's not that's the best way to use it, because sometimes. Because even though your cash and receivables are higher than your payables and credit line, you can't make payroll this week, because the receivables are just too high. It's just a cyclical thing. It's not like you're mismanaging your receivables. It's just a cyclical thing. So many times, and by the way, lots of times in those situations, your credit line is outstanding for a week or two. That's it.
Right.
But it saved you.
Exactly.
It saved you from going to a credit card, paying 18% or some 25, whatever crazy percent you're paying. It saved you from borrowing it from Aunt Mame. It just, and having, that embarrassment with family, or telling the wife you have to go into Hip Pocket National Bank, to take the money out and put it in the business. That's never, or a spouse, that's never a good conversation.
No, they don't want to do that.
They don't want to do that. So anyway, that's it. And the way you can reach me is by going to nextstepcfo.net and go to the contact page on my website, fill out the contact form. And if you have a question about line of credit, you can put the words line of credit in the message section. Be happy to answer your questions.
And go out there and get yourself an ice cream truck. Thanks once again, Michael, for some great advice. And I look forward to a lot more from you in our powerful business strategy segment of the Positively Pipeman. And next week, we're going to talk about something that goes hand in hand with that line of credit, solving cash flow problems. So stay tuned. Come back to hear the Adventures of Pipeman, W4CY Radio.
Thank you for listening to the Adventures of Pipeman on W4CY Radio.